let's talk about the Pantanal. So the Pantanal is the smallest of all biomes in Brazil. Less than 2% of the surface is covered by the Pantanal. So the Pantanal is this little guy here in the states of Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul, two states. It goes a little bit into Paraguay and Bolivia, but most of it is in Brazil. It's kind of in the middle here. The name Pantanal comes from Pantano, which means like a wetland or a bog or a swamp or a marsh. Because 80% of the area of the region is submerged during the rainy season, so seasonally submerged. The elevation is, of course, very low, between 80 and 150 meters. The rainfall is between 1,000 and 1,400 millimeters. And the area varies depending on the author and how you delimit, but it's between 140 and 210,000 square kilometers. In Brazil, it's in the states of Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul. Like I said, it goes into adjacent Bolivia and Paraguay too, but most of it is in Brazil. So it's right here, it's in the middle of South America, basically. And so in this map here, you see that the whole area gets flooded during the rainy season. This is the limit between Brazil and Bolivia, and here's the limit with Paraguay. These are the main cities and towns, especially Cuiabá, which is the capital of the state of Mato Grosso in the north here. And then you have Campo Grande, which is the capital of the state of Mato Grosso do Sul in the south here. And those are large cities, like, you know, the metropolitan area of Cuiabá has roughly 1 million people. And here you probably have probably not 1 million, but close to 1,800,000, something like that. And then you have Corumbá, which is this town here. It's not very small. It's probably about 100 or 200,000 people here in the heart of the Pantanal. And then there's a highway that goes to Campo Grande and beyond. And there's this road that goes around the Pantanal here, around Rondonópolis, and then all the way to Cuiabá here in the north, and Cáceres here, and then goes to the state of Rondônia here. The only road actually within the Pantanal, I mean, you have this road here that goes to Corumbá, that crosses the Pantanal from Miranda here to Corumbá. But there's also this road here, which is called the Transpantaneira Road, from Poconé to Porto Jofre. That's a scenic road, kind of a road park or something like that. Very nice. It's about 100 kilometers, and you have 100 bridges, so one bridge per kilometer here. The Pantanal is probably the best place in South America to see wildlife. It's much better than the Amazon or the Cerrado or any other place. It's a very good place to see wildlife, especially birds, but also mammals and a bunch of other stuff. There's a national park here, famous, the Pantanal Mato Grossense National Park here in this region. And you have main rivers here, the Cuiabá River, it's a large river that drains they all drain to the Paraguay River. So it's the Paraguay, this is the Alto Paraguay River Basin, the High Paraguay River Basin. There's a Negro River here, the Taquari, very important, the São Lourenço and the Piquiri here, they go here, and the Cuiabá River here, okay? And the Paraguay, of course, going from the north to the south. The habitats of the Pantanal, they vary a lot, and the divisions vary depending on the author. These authors here are divided into 5 different systems, okay? So systems that are permanently aquatic, like freshwater lakes, like natural lakes, ponds, and salinas, which are sort of a saltwater lakes, rivers, etc. So those are permanent, they're always, you know, with water. There's intermittent aquatic systems, like some channels. There's some paleo channels, the standing water that gets evaporated during the dry season. There's some permanently terrestrial systems at the border of the wetlands, some paleofluvial habitats. There's some intermittent terrestrial systems, so they're mostly terrestrial most of the year. There's some sandbanks, some rocks, grasslands, savannas, and forests. There's swamp systems, so those are like saturated soils that are always flooded. It's like swamps, floating islands, and the Buritizaú, the palm tree. Here you have a graph showing the precipitation in the Pantanal. So you have a dry season in June, July, August are the driest months. So a little bit of September too. And January, December, between October and February are the rainy season. And the Pantanal is in the middle of South America, so it gets it's interesting because it gets it touches the Amazon to the north, the Cerrado here to the east, a little bit of Atlantic forest to the south, the Chaco to the south and to the southwest here. So it's kind of a connecting point of different biomes. So the fauna and flora of Pantanal gets influenced by all these different biomes, all their different kinds of ecosystems around it. These are some of the landscape that you can find over there. Some rivers and lakes, some lakes here, some very few mountains here. This is the Amolar Mountains. And then you have some really complex lake systems with different, you see different colors because the water has some of them are fresh water, others are like brackish water. Some soda lakes like this one we're going to see in a minute. So in geological terms, the Pantanal actually is a result of the uplift of the Andes. So it's kind of a side effect of the uplift of the Andes, as you can see here in this geological map. So the Andes is here, okay, that's the Bolivian Chaco, the Paraguayan Chaco. The Pantanal Basin is here, okay. So the uplift of the Andes and the pressure from that actually resulted in the Pantanal Basin, okay. This is the thickness of the sediment. So it's thicker in the middle, and then it gets narrower toward the edges of the Pantanal. You can also see it here. So the deepest sediments are in the middle here, and then so these areas they actually went down as the Andes went up. The Pantanal Depression went down. As you can see here, the Serra do Amolar, which is the mountain that I showed before in the previous slide. The Urucum Massif, those are the west flank of the Pantanal. And then on the east flank, you have the Maracaju Plateau, right? And then you have rivers draining from the Maracaju Plateau to the west, okay, like the São Lourenço, the Piquiri, and the Taquari, and they form fans, like mega fans sometimes. So kind of a big fan here, the Negro River here. And the main river, which is the Paraguay, drains from north to south, and you have several oxbow lakes and other kinds of lakes along the way. Okay, so here you can see the depression of the Pantanal. The city of Corumbá is here, right? So remember the Campo Grande is here, so you have a road that goes around here, Miranda, and then the road goes in here. So that's why Corumbá is kind of in the middle of, not in the middle, but in the Pantanal itself. All other cities are surrounding it. Okay. So the Pantanal Basin is an active sedimentary basin. So you have faults, you have geological faults, and then you have earthquakes. Actually, there was a 5.4 earthquake a few years ago on a Richter scale. So there's some, I mean, for a country like Brazil that doesn't have strong quakes, that's a very strong. And so the subsidence of the Pantanal Basin is related to the Andean tectonics. And the Pleistocene climatic changes made the weather, the climate drier and cooler in the Pleistocene, right? So that had a strong influence in the Pantanal, okay? And then, as I said, you have the Paraguay trunk main river, and then several mega fans running from east to west. One of the most striking areas in the Pantanal is just south of the Taquari mega fan here, like in this region, is the Nhacolândia Pantanal. Nhacolândia, it's the owner of the land was his nickname was Nhaco, and then the Nhacoland became the name of the place. It has more than 17,000 lakes, shallow lakes. Usually they're round or elliptical, surrounded by sand ridges. So here you can see the satellite image of many lakes, different colors. Usually you have two main kinds of lakes. You have most of them, 96% are freshwater lakes, okay, ponds or lakes, which in Portuguese they're called baías, the freshwater ones. And then you have brackish or saline water lakes, which are called the salinas, which are only 3.3%, but they're very striking. And they're greenish because of cyanobacteria in the water, and they are alkaline. The pH is between 8 and 10. They're sometimes called soda lakes in English, okay? So they have this really greenish color. The origin of these lakes is controversial. Some authors argued that wind, it's the action of the wind, but some other authors argue that that's just the flow of the water and geochemical processes that made these lakes saline. And then some authors more recently argued that for neotectonic events, so tectonic events in recent times have shaped also the landscape and led to the formation of these brackish saline water, salinas. But they're still debated, hotly debated in literature. So we still don't know exactly how these soda lakes like this one were formed. Okay. In terms of biodiversity, the Pantanal has a high diversity, but many species actually rely on dry lands and not many endemic species, because many species also occur in other biomes like the Cerrado, the Amazon, or the Chaco. Okay, actually, some authors argue that the Pantanal is just a very special subset of the Cerrado. It would be Cerrado if it wasn't for the water level and the timing of the water changes throughout the year, and also because of the geographic position. But anyway, it's considered a biome on its own. But it has very many similarities with the Cerrado, but it has elements from both the Amazon, the Atlantic forest, and the Chaco. There are very few, like I said, very few endemic species. And one striking feature of the Pantanal is the large numbers of individuals of a given species, birds and even the jaguar. I mean, the density of jaguars in the Pantanal is probably the highest in the world. So there you have large populations of species, including endangered species like the jaguar. There are fewer trees adapted to long-term flooding in the Pantanal than in the Amazon. Okay, so if you go to a flooded forest in the Amazon, you have more adapted plants. So perhaps the plants there are there. So perhaps the flood was in the Amazon longer than in the Pantanal. Okay, or so some authors think that might be the result of Pleistocene climatic instabilities and the drying of the area, the cooling and drying of the area there in the Pleistocene ice ages might have erased that signal. Okay, but anyway, the life forms there today are very vulnerable to the flooding regime. So if you change the flooding regime, if you change the availability of water or when the water comes, and that can be changed by, for example, hydroelectric dam, the construction of hydroelectric dams for generating electricity. Okay. So here's an overview of the diversity of many different groups. We can call attention to the terrestrial plants. Not only aquatic plants are important, herbaceous aquatic plants, but herbaceous terrestrial plants are very important. 900 species. So, lots of algae, of course, as woody plants. Invertebrates, you have like shells and some small planktonic animals like the zooplankton, so very tiny microscopic organisms that are in the water. And then here you have like fish, a lot of fish diversity. Fishing is sports fishing especially is a major point in the Pantanal, and lots of birds, lots of birds, lots of species and lots of individuals of many species. and also a large number of mammals and reptiles as well. Again, it's a small biome, so the numbers are proportional to the size like we mentioned before. Plant diversity, here we have some typical representatives of the plants of the Pantanal. The purple ipê or piúva, which is this one here, nice tree. See that in flooded areas, so it grows in flooding areas. The carandá, Copernicia alba, which is a palm tree, typical. Sometimes they dominate the landscape, and then we call it carandazal because we have many carandás next to each other. The cambará is also a very common plant with the yellow flowers sticking out, and sometimes you can easily see from the air many flowering cambará trees. This is an endemic plant and endangered from the Pantanal, which is not very common to see endemic plants there, like I mentioned before. It's the aguapé, the water hyacinth, very common too in the Pantanal because of course, because of the many water bodies around. Here's some animals. The jabiru stork, or tuiuiu in Portuguese, jabiru tuiuiu, a very large bird. It's the symbol of the Pantanal, so very common. It nests in high trees. And beautiful animal, and you know flies around with a bunch of, usually with lots of egrets that dominate the landscape. Also, spoonbills are common, but these guys here are the winners. I mean, those are the most abundant animals in the Pantanal. You're going to see them, you know, one after the other. It's hard, you can't miss. You're going to see hundreds. If you go to the Pantanal, if you drive through the Transpantaneira road, you're going to see hundreds, if not thousands, of capybaras and caimans. Okay, lots of them. Capybara is the largest rodent in the world. It can reach up to 40 kilos. They live in groups, of family groups of many individuals, 10, maybe 20, maybe 30 individuals. And they are like semi-aquatic, so they're fit for the Pantanal. They occur everywhere, but they really like the Pantanal. And of course, caimans are very common feature in the Pantanal landscape. The large blue macaws, they're much larger than the ones we saw in the Caatinga region, for example, which are small blue macaws. The marsh deer in the Pantanal, you know, in the water, see that most animals here are in the Pantanal because they're in the water, like the jaguar, which is a beautiful animal. Like I mentioned before, the jaguars are very common. Jaguars occur in the Amazon. Jaguars occur even in the Atlantic forest, in some large remnants of Atlantic forest. But in the Pantanal, the density of jaguars is high, and it's much easier to see them. I've never seen them in the wild, but I've been there a long time ago, and in recent years, more and more tourists are able to see jaguars around in kind of easily. Okay, the anaconda, that's very common all around the Pantanal. You're probably going to see one if you walk around through the landscape. This is the lowland tapir. It's the largest terrestrial mammal in Brazil. Not very common to see there, but it's also present. And that's the giant river otter. It's an amazing animal. It's much bigger than the common river otter. It's endangered in many places. And in Pantanal, you can still have a good population of these animals, amazing animals, carnivorous, of course. Human occupation in the Pantanal goes way back, like 5,000 years ago, by the indigenous people, probably the Tupi-Guarani indigenous tribes that occupy the land. In the 16th century, the European colonization started, and then people started from European origin started settling in the area, and today they're called the Pantaneiros. Okay, they started living in small riverine communities, and doing cattle ranching and fishing were the main activities. Again, I mean, agriculture is not viable in the Pantanal because of the flooding regime, but the pastures are, because you can move cattle around. So in the dry season, you can have your cattle go look for pastures everywhere, but then in the rainy season, you have to get everybody together in the land that remains unflooded. In the late 20th century and now in the 21st century, soybean and cattle ranch intensified in the region. So there's a lot more pressure. The number of cattle herds increased significantly. So that become a problem, because even though you still keep the vegetation, but you have the cattle stepping on all the grasses, and it changes the ecosystem. It doesn't, you can't run away from that. This is the Transpantaneira, the road that I mentioned that crosses the Pantanal. So here's the Transpantaneira. Those are some of the bridges that you're going to encounter if you drive through the Transpantaneira. And then, on both sides, you're going to see hundreds and thousands of birds and caimans and capybaras and many other animals. It's a trip worth taking. That's the typical, the cattle ranchers and the cattle moving around. Fishing is also important, has been important for a while, but there's been a decline in fish in the catchment of fish. So as you see, both professional fishing has declined in recent years, and especially recreational fishing has declined significantly from the 1990s to the 2000s. So that's a concern. Deforestation, bank erosion, mining is also a problem. And also, like I mentioned before, the construction of hydroelectric dams, changing, not in the Pantanal, but around it, and then changing the flooding regime, changing the flow of the rivers. So that's a critical point. If you change that, the Pantanal doesn't exist. It only exists because of the seasonal flooding that takes place there. And all the animals and plants rely on that for their survival and reproduction. The main threats, so deforestation, habitat degradation. Perhaps it's not the removal of vegetation, but the changes to the vegetation with intensive human activities. Wildfires, by the way, last year, 2020 was the worst year in terms of fires, was like cover of the New York Times and many other journals and magazines. This is the amount of fire you had in the Pantanal. Some people estimate that 20% of the whole biome was gone, okay, under fire. These are the protected areas. Okay, some of the protected areas were highly affected. Hydrological changes, as I just mentioned, the construction of even small hydroelectric dams and power plants. Unregulated tourism, one of the main sources of income to the Pantanal in recent decades is tourism, ecotourism, but if it's not regulated, you have strong impact. Introduction of exotic species, I'll show you in a minute. Road traffic might be a problem, especially the road that goes from Campo Grande to Corumbá, which crosses the Pantanal. Wildlife hunting and trafficking is still a problem, especially because it's, this is a border region with the Bolivia and Paraguay. So, people can just do things and just, escape, go to another country, and then, legislation changes and it's harder to get them. And also climate change, especially the reduction of the amount of water. And so the droughts are more severe, and that's a big problem. Here, it's interesting to see this. The red areas are anthropogenic areas. So you see that everything around the Pantanal has changed. The landscape has changed completely to mostly pastures or agriculture, right? Within the Pantanal, it's more protected, but then you have a lot of things going on here, here as well, and then around Corumbá here, okay? But you see that the Pantanal is still protected. This is the last year's fire, 2020 fires. As you see here, it was the a lot. I mean, 2019 was bad, okay? That's the number of fire detection, but 2020 was just the worst in history, okay? 1/3 some estimate that 1/3 of the area was burned, okay? That's a lot, including the 100% of the Pantanal National Park, which is a World Heritage Site, was burned. So very severe. So all these areas here were burned. That's very, very sad. So that was on the news and, you know, Nature Journal. And so if you join 2019 with 2020, you have a incredible destruction, including some indigenous territories, okay, like this indigenous area here, for example, this indigenous area here, this one here. So not only natural reserves, but also indigenous reservations that were also highly affected by fire. And finally, the exotic species that have been introduced, that's the main problem in the Pantanal. Many different grasses, including the African grass, Brachiaria. This one here dominates the vegetation. The feral hog, the porco monteiro, or it's called by the Pantaneiros. Some studies estimated more than 10,000 groups of feral hogs roaming on the Pantanal. That's a lot. They've been going on for a while, since the Paraguay war in the 1800s. The golden mussel was introduced from China into the La Plata River from a ship that came from China in 1998. It's a very recent introduction, but then it spread through the Paraguay River basin. Now it's in the Pantanal. The tucunaré, which is an Amazonian carnivorous fish, it's a predator. It was introduced in the 1980s in the Pantanal, and you know, where you introduce this guy, it just eats up everything and destroys and the diversity of fish in the Pantanal is very high, right? And you have a really nice balance of, you know, like the piranhas and the carnivorous and other fish, but this guy is big and it's fierce and it's a really, really aggressive predator. So in other parts of the Brazil, we introduced that too. In the Atlantic forest, some lakes, some natural lakes, it just destroys biodiversity and drives the extinction of many, many species, either by competing with them or by eating them. The cattle, of course, it's the main, one of the main economic drivers of the Pantanal, and also the buffaloes, water buffaloes have been introduced, and now they estimated more than 5,000 heads of buffaloes. Of course, buffaloes, you know, water buffaloes like water. Pantanal has lots of water, so that also is a main problem there. Okay, that's it.